Has that ever happened to you before? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about an elven princess? That's not what I mean. What I mean, has you ever woken up in the middle of the night concerned about your own future? I have. It actually happens to me somewhat regularly. I think there's something that happens to us regularly that we don't always have great language for, right? The sense that, you can do all the right things to build the life that you're supposed to build, right? To build a good life, you can finish high school and go to college and get a job and, begin to make more than minimum wage and create some level of financial stability. Maybe at that point you have enough to offer somebody else that they want to be your life mate and actually dive into life with you. Maybe then you have some kids and you fill up your calendar with all the awesome family activities and do all the things that you're supposed to do. Maybe you even have a little bit left over to do vacation every once in a while. And all of that happens, and yet somewhere in quiet moments, maybe on a long car drive, maybe in the middle of the night, we wake up and we ask ourselves a question. Is this it? Is this everything? Not because life is bad, but because something in each one of us believes that we were made for more than that. Right? Most people, you know what, and this isn't even, if you're here today and you're not sure what you think about Jesus, or you don't believe in God, and you just came because somebody offered you lunch, that's okay. Listen, all of us, I think all of us, like all 8 billion or so of us, share these instincts. My life should count. I want to make an impact. My life should matter beyond myself. And while we live in an era where we have so many answers to the hows of life, we've learned so much, we still can't explain why we feel like we should matter. We can't explain why we believe that our life is more than the sum or the eventuality of a mathematical equation, which is where a pure, scientific view of the universe would leave us. Why is it that we feel that way? Where does that come from? My reasonable answer, I think that, look, if it's true, and I think that it is, that all of us feel like that, all 8 billion of us share some of those instincts, doesn't that point us towards some level of intelligent design? Doesn't that point us towards intentionality? Does that, 8 billion is a lot of coincidences, isn't it? As I have tried to live life in such a way that I make connections with people who don't necessarily believe the same thing that I do, I still find this commonality and this sense that there's more, that we believe we are supposed to be significant. And I believe it's not by accident. That's by design, right? And if you think about it, it's strange that that's the truth, if that's the truth, because God doesn't need you or me to do things. He's quite capable on his own. As far as I understand him, he's a big boy. He can do what he wants to do. He doesn't need us to carry out his plans. Whoever the most talented person in the room is, God still doesn't need our talent. And yet the story of God that we are left through the scriptures, the interactions that people have, the very beginning of that story tells us that we were made in God's image. And we're told a story of how God worked to create. And we're supposed to take from that story, I believe, that God's motivation for creation in the first place was love, because that's who he is. And so when he placed us on this planet, he didn't just place us here to enjoy it, although that was part of it. Live and eat freely. Wouldn't that be amazing? Right? Never have to worry about it at all. But we were also invited to work it, to cultivate it, to contribute to creation. Because there is a profound truth I think we often forget, that people don't discover life through consumption. We discover life through participation. Right? We have so many stories of people who have dedicated their lives to consumption, to the pursuit of things, and then they get to some point in their life and go, everything I have and everything I've done, I still feel this hole inside of me. And friends, what I want us to explore today is that we were created on purpose for a purpose. That feeling that you have, the sense of being made for more, is a feeling that we have to listen to. It's an invitation. Right? Think about it this way. I think we understand this somewhat intuitively, because we know that we have to help our kids move beyond consumption and become participants. Right? Like, think back, those of you who have been married for at least a little while, those of you who haven't, this is going to come. You move into your first house with your new partner. And when you're young and you have no kids, it's so easy to keep your house clean. Do you remember what it was like to not come home every night and go, the kids destroyed the kitchen again? Do you remember? Yeah, it was a beautiful time in life. Everything was perfect, right? It smelled clean, right? It felt peaceful. And you and your significant other and anybody else who came over enjoyed the peace that you created. And then you had a brilliant idea to bring children into the world. And they messed everything up. In your house, I mean. In your house, right? They started pooping and doing the things that kids do that you have to clean up after, throwing up everywhere and throwing their Cheerios on the floor and the progression of what kids do with the things that you give them, right? Now, at some point, they start to cross a line in which you instinctively know it is time for you to begin helping. Right? Because if you don't teach them how to do this, they won't grow up. Right? They need to participate. They need to learn how to take some ownership. You cannot send them away to college for the first time and have them have no concept of how to clean the apartment that they have to share with other people. They will get beat up. You know that you have to teach them this before they leave, even though the process is now going to be slower, messier, and less efficient. Friends, that's exactly how God works. He knows that we need to participate. He could accomplish everything he wants to accomplish in the world without you and me, but in his love, he is driven to be patient enough even to include us. He knows the satisfaction of meaningful work. God put himself to work and then made us in that image. He wants us to experience the meaning that comes from meaningful participation. And one of the things that I want to just highlight and call you back on, sometimes when we start talking about things like meaning and destiny, and that's a sexy word for meaning, all these things that we sometimes talk about, people check out because they think what I'm going to say is, and so you have to sign up to be a missionary on the other side of the world and leave everything you have and sell your goods and give them to the poor and, all those radical things. And some of you might do that. Some of you might be called to that. Most of us won't. And the good news is, I don't think you need to do that in order to live the life that God intends for you to live and find the meaning that he intends for you to find. In fact, In fact, I think he does that through most of the most simple things in our life. That's what we see as we explore the life of Paul the apostle, right? If you're not super familiar with the scriptures, Paul wrote an awful lot of the back half of the Bible. You know, he's a very ambitious guy. When they decided to help spread the church out throughout the known world, you know, most of the apostles were like, it's cool, I just want to stay really close to home, you know, within a few mile radius of Jerusalem. And Paul was like, that's great, I'll take everything else. I'll take the gospel everywhere else. You guys stay here, and I'm going to go do this thing. I'll build a team, and we'll do it. And in Acts chapter 17, we find that Paul has visited this place called Thessalonica. Okay? And what we discover is that he goes there to share the good news about Jesus having come and lived and died and rose from the dead. Because we know that's what Paul taught. He taught Christ crucified and raised from the dead. But we also discover that he was only there 3 Sabbath days, so basically 3 weeks, to try to help people understand Jesus. But at the time, you know, it wasn't okay for Christians to share their faith openly. And so, in response to Paul's work, a bunch of riots broke out to the point that Paul has to escape from Thessalonica really quickly, which is why he was only there for 3 weeks. He barely gets connected to these people, barely knows them. But because of what they shared in Christ, this is one of the amazing things that I've seen in my life, is how quickly you can form bonds with people you don't know or you've never met because of Jesus. And so Paul has this experience of being connected to these people quickly but deeply. And so he, as he continues his work, is thinking about and concerned about them. And he sends Timothy, one of his teammates, back to check on these Christians to see if their faith survived the pressure of life. Just like we were talking about earlier in Dave's story, you know, just because we come to Jesus, unfortunately, I wish I had better news. It doesn't mean that life stops having tension. It doesn't mean that external forces don't push on your life. What it means is that God, in his infinite care and love for us, has built life in such a way that there are things we can pursue to stand up to the pressures of life. And oftentimes, it isn't until pressure hits your life that your faith becomes real to you and the other people around you. So Paul sends with Timothy a letter. We call it 1 Thessalonians, right? It's written to the Thessalonians. There's 2 of them, actually, but this is from the first one. This is what Paul says to them in chapter 3. So when I could stand it no longer, I just had to know how things were going. We thought it would be better to send Timothy to you and be left alone in Athens. So we sent Timothy, who is our brother and co-worker in God's service, spreading the gospel of Christ to strengthen you and encourage you in your faith, so that no one would be unsettled by these trials, these pressures that you're experiencing. For you know quite well, it seems like Paul's saying the same thing that I'm saying, you know quite well that we are destined for some level of trouble. Right? You and I, we may not face riots regarding our faith. Hopefully not. Hopefully that's not the life that we're going to live. You know, sometimes when people read things like this, they get a little down on themselves about the faith life that they're living. It's like, oh, I only have first world problems. You know, I can never identify with these people who had all these other problems. The problem is you're a first world person. So first world problems are the only ones you have, right? And I think it's okay that you have first world problems. I think God still cares about your problems. I think he still wants you to share them with him. I think he still wants you to support you through them. So when you experience relational strain, financial pressure, concerns about your health or the health of people around you, like we were talking about a moment ago, mental exhaustion and uncertainty about the future, God cares. God cares, and his work in your life, the development of your faith as you learn to trust him, can be the thing that stands up under those pressures. Life will press on you. It's often said that there's two certain things in life, death and taxes. Add pressure to that, right? It's not a very good list, but it's true, I think. Pressure is inevitable. And the question is not whether trouble and pressure will come. The question is, what keeps me going when life presses in? What keeps me moving? And here's what Paul discovers through these little early followers of Jesus. Their faith didn't just survive. It turned into an encouragement to him. I mean, if there is a Superman of the faith, after Jesus, I guess, like Paul is on the list of people that might be considered, like, wow, he did all that for Jesus. Isn't that amazing? He did all that with his life. And even so, the simple faith of these people he had barely met, their ordinary lives, inspired and encouraged Paul, right? They weren't professionals. They weren't trained. They weren't pastors. They weren't theologians, right? They weren't perfect Christians. We often say around here, like, this is the only kind of person that's not welcomed at Burnett Church. No perfect people allowed, I guess there's probably other places for that, but I'm imperfect, you're imperfect. I made it imperfect as soon as I came. So there's no perfect people allowed here, but the Thessalonian church didn't have any perfect people either. They had no building. They had no fancy technology to make the atmosphere better. They had no services. They didn't even have a Bible yet. No systems or programs. And God used them anyway. Because purpose is not found in position. And it doesn't require a certain set of tools or resources. Purpose is found in participation. You discover meaning as you become a part of somebody else's story. See what Paul says here in Thessalonians 3:7. They remained strong in their faith. And this encourages Paul. But in this case, strong doesn't mean like self-sufficient, okay? Strong means interdependent. Dependent on God and dependent on those they're doing life with. We live in a culture that resists this so much. More and more and more, it feels like we just think we can do it on our own. We resist dependence and interdependence. But God calls us to do that. And as we do it, we become stronger in our faith, right? A few weeks ago, we were talking about a series of things that grow up your faith. And we said faith is really just your ability to trust in God. Y'all know what a trust fall is, right? You have to get up on a table and expect somebody's going to catch you and hope that you don't fall down and bang your head, right? It requires a huge amount of trust in somebody else to make sure that we don't fall down. You can't do a trust fall without somebody else, right? There's no self-reliant way to fall off a table and not bang your head. We prefer that life for some reason. Like I said, as silly as that seems, for some reason, it's like, man, we're trying to do all these things on our own all the time. And that will just lead you to a place of burning out, loneliness. I learned this most acutely in one of what I call my fit phases. Now, I'm not in a fit phase right now. It's okay, you can laugh. It's fun. Not in a fit phase right now, but I have been in fit phases. My fitness journey kind of looks like this. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. Up and down all over the place. I came out at 10 pounds and have never fully recovered. But I have had times where I felt like I was doing well. Just before COVID was one of those moments. We lived directly across from a YMCA in Ontario. So I could look out my front bay window and tell that there was nobody at the Y, which is exactly how I like to work out. If I am grunting and sweating, I do not want to talk to anybody else if I can avoid it. So I would look often. It was 7 o'clock at night. I'm like, nobody's working out right now. I'm going to go and do my thing. The problem is, as you progress, you get to a point where you probably should have some help. You know, like if you're going to squat 300 pounds, it might be a good idea to have a spotter. And I was too dumb to ask anybody to come help me. So people would just start offering. When they would come in the gym, I'd be there trying to do my weight. And they would come up behind me and they're like, dude, do you need a hand? I'm like, get off me. No, I don't need a hand, right? Until the day that I tried to do some dumbbell bench presses. You know what dumbbells are? They're the one, okay? With some heavier weights. And in order to do a dumbbell bench press, you kind of have to like control the weights down and lay on the bench, okay? And so I had these, relatively heavy. I'm not trying to brag, so I won't tell you how heavy they were, but, heavy. So heavy weights, and they're on my chest, and I try to go down, except I lose control, and the weights start rolling off, and they pull my shoulders in two directions, and I ripped both of my rotator cuffs, okay, in one fell motion. That was the end of my fit phase in 2019, and then COVID came, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here we are in 2026 thinking about trying to have a fit phase again. The point is, friends, we need help, right? It is unwise to take on the pressures of life without a spotter. Who is in your life that is going to have your back when you are about to do something foolish? Who is that person? Who are you learning from? Who are you intertwined with? Right? We talk a lot here about next steps out of this place. I love Sunday mornings. Man, do I love church, okay? I love that you all come and you permit me to do this thing every week. It's amazing. I love it. But I also believe that you need more intimate contact with people, right? And so we design environments like serving teams and brotherhood and sisterhood, and from there, maybe 3 or 4 people that you huddle up with on a regular basis to be accountable to, depending on your life phase and all that kind of stuff. The point is, like your faith isn't designed to work just in this. You need some people who have your back. And in that way, groups, teams, smaller environments aren't just like spiritual options, they're spiritual oxygen. Because you were never meant to carry the weight of this world alone. Not even Paul was ready to do that. In the next verse, chapter 3, verse 8, Paul notes that they were standing firm, which might sound an awful lot like having a strong faith. But what I want to point out here is that like standing in one place isn't spectacular. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't do anything different. Right? They didn't change their city, sell their house, give to the poor. Not in some sort of like extravagant, extraordinary, or at least we're not told that they did that. What we're told is that they just didn't move, right? In our lives, we need people who stand firm. Firm looks like those people who we've seen continue to trust even after disappointment and loss, right? You can be somebody who stands firm when you show up, even when you've been disappointed. Right? Who hangs on to their belief even when believing becomes difficult. We all need people who play these parts. And as we do for others, we produce something in them. Right? Think about it this way. If you're a hockey fan, hopefully most of you were watching Olympic hockey. If you weren't, you may be asked for your citizenship card back. It's part of being Canadian, but it's okay. Just hold on. Hopefully you were watching, and unfortunately we lost. I don't know if you know that or not. The spoiler alert: we lost to the Americans. And there was a guy who played a really important part on the American team who used to play a really important part on our team, Quinn Hughes. Is it too soon to talk about this? Okay. Quinn left. He left because Vancouver's even worse than Toronto. Quinn left. But when he was here, right? And so Quinn Hughes, if you don't know, Quinn is like probably the second best, maybe the best defenseman in the entire NHL. He has vision and skill and skating ability that is abundantly rare. He might be one of the top 5 or 6 defensemen of all time in the NHL based on his skill set. He's an amazing guy. So Quinn regularly, takes a lap and dances around and does all his fancy moves and, all that kind of stuff. But if you're a fan of the Canucks, you know this other guy. His name is Philip Hronek. He's Quinn Hughes' partner. And you know what Philip does while Quinn dances? Philip stays at home. Philip stays on the blue line. He is the last guy between the other team and the goaltender more often than not, right? He is dependable, quiet, responsible, totally unflashy. We probably only know who he is because he's Quinn's partner. But you know what? Most of the work that God does in our world is done through people like Philip Hronek, not through people like Quinn Hughes. It's done with quiet responsibility, showing up regularly, holding the line. It's parents being there for their kids. It's volunteers coming and spending an hour with our kids, leading a youth program, showing up super early to make sure that we have music on a Sunday morning. It's group leaders and people who are invested in others. It's prayer warriors and quiet encouragers, people behind the scenes who most people will never know and never see. This is how God does his work. In other words, simply showing up and being present is often the message that people need to hear. Your kids will not remember every sermon that you speak to them. I promise you. I know this because that's my daughter laughing. I know this because I talk to you for 35 minutes every week. And if I asked any of you what I said 4 weeks ago, I bet you probably couldn't tell me. Unless that was an extraordinarily good moment, right? Like I try to craft like one thing. I talk for 35 minutes to get you to remember one thing, okay? So people don't often remember everything that you say to them, but they will remember that you showed up. They will remember that you're there to support them. And through showing up and through those moments of just being available, whether it's our kids or our coworkers or our neighbors, may never remember our sophisticated proofs for God, our attempts to make sense of it, but they will remember that you love them. And that will change them. That's what we see happens to Paul. Paul says that these really simple things brought him joy, right? And joy, you've probably heard this before. Maybe you haven't. Joy in the way that the writers of Scripture describe it is something so much more than just being happy. Happiness is great, but happiness is something that changes. You know, like I'm happy when I'm eating ice cream and then sad when it's gone. You know, like it's momentary. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm not in a fit phase. You know, I'm happy when I eat ice cream, but sad when it's gone. Okay? Joy is not dependent on ice cream or any other external circumstances. Joy is something that God roots deep in us because we know that he is faithful even when things are changing in our life. And we get to learn that because even when it doesn't feel that way for us, we can see it in somebody else. Their standing firm, their strong faith does this thing in Jesus' kingdom. You know, so often it feels like the things that Jesus calls us to are backwards and upside down from what we expect. And so we think that we need to be encouraged. Do you know who gets encouraged? Those who encourage. When you give encouragement, you get encouraged. Those who serve, right? Who give themselves away, they find their life. You don't find life by focusing on you. You find it by focusing on others. Which is what Jesus did for us. Gave himself away that we might find life. And in it, God was pleased to give Jesus the fullness of life to share with us. And so what I want to encourage you this week to do is really simple. Find a way in the natural, everyday rhythms of your life to bring joy to someone else. I'm going to ask our musicians to come back. Maybe that's just as simple as sending a text message to encourage another person. It's so simple. Maybe it is offering to pray with somebody. Maybe it's an invitation to spend time with somebody you haven't spent time with in a while. Just put yourself in a position to show up for somebody else, to bless somebody else. You may end up being the encouragement that that person needs to find joy. And when you do, what I have learned is that we experience the meaning that we're searching for. Suddenly, even the smallest parts of our life become meaningful.